The morning Hope Cobb drove her father's motorcycle to Steele's Auto and Salvage. The sky above Harlan County was the color of old pewter, and the air smelled like it always did in October, wood smoke from the ridge houses, diesel from the highway, and the damp rot of leaves going soft against the creek bank. She had not slept more than 4 hours. She knew that before her boots hit the gravel of the parking lot because the number was a fact she had been carrying since Monday like a stone in her coat pocket. 3 shifts in 2 days. A breakfast rotation at the diner on Route 18, closing the floor alone after the dishwasher called out sick. A warehouse job the night before that lasted until 2 in the morning, stacking returns under fluorescent light while her feet went numb in the steel-toed shoes she had bought secondhand. And that morning, 4 hours of cleaning the laundromat on Cedar Fork Road, mopping between the machines and emptying the lint traps and restacking the wire hangers that never stayed where you put them. She had come to Steele's directly from there, her black work shoes still damp at the seams, her hair pulled back in a way that had started neat at 5 in the morning and had stopped being neat by 8. The Harley was in the back of a borrowed truck, a 1974 shovelhead black paint worn to a soft gray at the tank edges, chrome dulled by 30 years of weather, a dent on the left side of the tank, shaped like a thumbprint pressed into the metal from the inside. Her father had made that dent in their narrow driveway the summer she was 6 years old, backing the bike out too fast with his elbow catching the fence post, and the sound of it had made him go still for a full second before he started laughing. He laughed about that dent every year until the year he stopped laughing about anything. William Cobb had ridden that motorcycle to the mill for 28 years. He rode it in weather people told him was too cold, and in rain people told him was too heavy, and in fog people told him was too thick to see through. And every time he came home with his jacket dark and his gloves soaked through, he would say the same thing to Hope from the doorway of the kitchen, still dripping, still grinning. The old girl never let me down. He said it until Hope was old enough to understand that he was talking about the bike and also about something he could not quite name out loud, which was the kind of man he had spent 30 years trying to become. He had been dead for 11 months when Hope pulled the truck into Steele's lot and cut the engine. She sat there for a moment with her hands still on the wheel, watching the shop through the windshield. Steele's Auto and Salvage occupied a low cinder block building at the edge of what had been an old farm supply yard, the lot enclosed on 3 sides by rows of salvaged tires stacked against a wire fence and lines of dead vehicles parked in the brown grass beyond it. The sign above the bay door was hand-painted the name in red block letters that had faded to rust, and the open flag in the window was the kind of plastic banner that had been there long enough to stop meaning anything. She had found the place through a mechanic at the diner, a regular named Boyd, who ate eggs every Thursday morning and always left a $5 tip on a $9 check. Boyd had said Steele was straight, that he knew old iron, that he would tell you the truth about a bike, even if the truth cost you money. Hope had written the address on a diner receipt and kept it folded in her coat pocket for 2 weeks before she had enough in her checking account to feel like she could afford an estimate without panicking. That had been the plan. An estimate, not a miracle. She was 26 years old, and she had long since stopped expecting miracles from men in repair shops, or from anyone else for that matter. She had gone back to the truck 3 times in the past 2 weeks to look at that receipt, not to read the address, which she already knew, but to look at it. Because as long as the receipt was still folded in her pocket and the bike was still under the tarp in the bed of the truck, the verdict had not come in yet. The bike could still be saved as long as nobody official had told her otherwise. She got out of the truck. The morning had gotten colder since she left the laundromat. October in Harlan County did that drop 10 degrees in an hour if the clouds decided to close in from the ridge. She pulled her canvas jacket tighter and unlatched the truck gate and wrestled the ramp into position without asking for help, because there was no one to ask, and because she had been doing things without asking for long enough that it had stopped feeling like a choice. The bike came down the ramp slowly, Hope walking it backward with both hands on the grips, feeling the weight of it settle into the gravel, and trying to remember if her father had always made this look easy, or if she had just been too young to notice when it was not. Charles Steele came out of the bay when he heard the ramp scrape the gravel. He was a square-built man in his late 50s, with a face that had the outdoors in it the way some faces do, cut down and reddened, and permanently set into an expression that suggested he had heard every version of every story before yours and found most of them unconvincing. He wore a navy coverall with Steele's stenciled on the chest pocket and he walked with the slight roll of a man whose knees had taken years of concrete floors. He looked at the bike without looking at Hope first, which told her something before he opened his mouth. "Nice old iron," he said, then he looked at her. "You the one called about the shovel head?" "Yes, sir," she said. "My father's." She said it the way she said everything about William Cobb now, with the words held just slightly apart from her voice, so the emotion had less surface to stick to. "I think it might be the carburetor, or maybe the fuel line. It would not start last month, and I have been sitting on it since. I just want to know what is wrong with it." Steele nodded the way mechanics nod when they are already calculating something other than the repair. He walked around the bike, went slowly, his boots crunching in the gravel, and crouched down to look at the engine case from the left side. He pressed one thumb against the petcock, then stood up and looked at the tank. "I will pull it into the bay and have a look," he said. "Might take me until afternoon." Hope said that was fine. She gave him her phone number on the back of a grocery receipt because that was what she had in her pocket. And he told her the diagnostic fee was $80 regardless of outcome. And she said she understood, and that was the transaction. She drove back to the apartment and lay down on the couch with her coat still on and was asleep inside 4 minutes. He called at 2:15 that afternoon. "The engine is gone," he said. "Compression is dead. Fuel line is corroded through. I replaced the section I could get to, but the motor itself is beyond economical repair. You are looking at more money than this bike will ever be worth on the road." Hope sat up on the couch. She had one boot off and one boot on, which told her she had not made it 30 seconds before she went under. "What do you mean beyond economical repair?" she said. "I mean what it says. The piston rings are shot, the heads are worn. You would be rebuilding an engine that has not been properly serviced in probably a decade, and the parts alone would run you more than $3,000, not counting labor." She was quiet for a moment. "Is there another option?" she asked. Steele paused the way people pause when they are deciding how to frame the part you are not going to like. "I do buy old iron," he said. "For parts or scrap. I could give you $600 for the shovel head as she sits. That is fair market on a non-runner of that age, and it would cover your diagnostic fee and then some." $600, she said. "That is my offer." Hope looked at the window, which faced the parking lot behind the apartment building, which was not a view that had ever given her anything worth looking at. She thought about the dent on the tank and her father's laugh and the red-handled wrenches sorted by size and the coffee cans on his workbench, the 9/16 painted red because he used them most, and she thought about 28 years of a man riding that motorcycle to a mill in all weather and never once saying it let him down. "I will have to think about it," she said. "Storage starts at $40 a day," Steele said. "We can square that against the scrap offer if you decide by 5 o'clock. After that, it runs against whatever you come in owing." She said she understood and ended the call. She sat on the couch with the dead phone in both hands and looked at the wall and tried to breathe carefully. The wall had a water stain above the baseboard heater that she had been meaning to report to the landlord for 4 months. She looked at it the way you look at things when the actual thing you are trying to look at is not in the room. Then she got up, pulled her boot back on, took the folded receipt with the shop address from her coat pocket, and drove back to Steele's. She drove the 12 miles with the radio off, which she did sometimes when she needed to think, and sometimes when she needed to not think, and this time was the second kind. She passed the diner on Route 18 in the junction with Cedar Fork Road and the feed store that had been closed for 2 years and was still advertising a sale in its window, and she watched the county go past in the gray October light and let it be what it was, which was a place she knew and had always known the particular familiar landscape of a life stayed close to home. Her father had stayed close to home. He had the mill and the road and the bike and the house on the gravel road off Route 18, and he had stayed within 20 miles of that house for 30 years after he left whatever else he had been, and she had always thought of that as a quality of contentment, the quality of a man who found what he needed where he was and had the good sense to stay. She still thought that. She also now thought that contentment and letting go were not the same thing, and that a man could do one without the other, and that her father had done both. She had $43 in cash and no plan beyond standing at that counter until she understood what was actually wrong with her father's bike. She did not know exactly what she was going to say. She only knew she was not signing anything. The shop smelled the same as it had that morning, but darker somehow, the way enclosed spaces smell when the afternoon light flattens out and the heat of a working bay starts to turn old grease and metal into something that sits in the back of your throat. Hope went to the parts counter at the front of the shop. There was a strip light above the counter that buzzed faintly at one end, and below it a scatter of small parts. A 9/16-inch wrench with a red-painted handle, loose spark plugs, a cracked jar of valve caps priced at $3 each, a coffee-stained invoice pad, a coil of rubber fuel hose. The plywood surface of the counter was scarred with ring marks from coffee cups and scored with the grooves of things dragged across it over years. Steele came out of the bay when he heard the door. He looked at her and then at the paperwork she was not yet holding because she had not been given any. "Thought about it," he said. "I want to see the bike," she said, "and I want to see the invoice for what you did to it." He pulled the invoice pad from under the counter and tore off the top sheet and slid it across the plywood with 2 fingers. Hope spread it flat with both palms and read it slowly. The numbers sat across from her like a sentence in a language she had known all along. Diagnostic labor. Fuel system inspection. Fuel line section replaced. Engine failure beyond economical repair. Storage notice fees begin at 5 p.m. Below that in blocky handwriting, recommended disposition, scrap or sale. The total at the bottom was $1,180. $300 paid at drop-off, $220 charged to her debit card for the fuel line work, and the rest marked pending in red pen. She looked at the pending number and thought about the 3 shifts in the $43 in her coat pocket and what it meant for a number on a piece of paper to be marked pending in red. "I paid $220 for a fuel line I have not yet seen," she said. "It is installed," Steele said. "You can see the bike if you want, but the engine assessment stands. I have been doing this for 15 years. I know what dead iron looks like." "I'm not selling it," Hope said. The words came out thinner than she meant them to, because she was exhausted down to the place in her chest where the strong voice lives, and that place was running low. But the sentence held. It held the way a wire holds under tension, not because it is built for it, but because letting go would mean falling. Steele put both forearms on the counter, which was the posture of a man who has decided the conversation is almost over even though it is not. "I appreciate that it belonged to your daddy," he said, "but sentiment does not rebuild compression rings. You want a miracle on that engine, go to church. You want a fair offer on dead iron? I have got a form right here." He tapped the purchase form beside the invoice. The signature line was blank, and the price at the top said $600. Hope looked at the form and did not pick up the pen. That was when the light from the open bay door changed. She noticed it the way you notice something in the corner of your vision that your brain files before you can name it: a widening, a shift in the gray afternoon coming through the prop door, and then the sound of boots on wet concrete. Heavy boots, multiple sets, slow. She turned. The man who came through the bay door first was broad across the shoulders in the way that looks like something structural, rather than something worked, for the kind of width that comes from decades of physical work that has settled into the frame and stopped being visible as effort. He wore a denim cut over a flannel shirt, the vest darkened along the collar and seams from weather, and the patches on the back were faded enough that Hope could not read the full club name from where she stood. His beard had gray in it. His hands were dark with grease. He was somewhere between 50 and 60, with the kind of face that has been shaped by wind and by choices made in difficult places, and his eyes, when they moved to Hope across the shop, were the quiet brown of someone who has learned that looking calm is its own kind of power. 3 men came in behind him, spreading out without being told to, one moving toward the open front door, one drifting toward the tire rack against the right wall, and one settling into the narrow side aisle between the shelving units, stacked with belts and filters and plastic bins. They were all roughly the same age, worn-looking, in the particular way of men who have spent most of their adult lives outdoors or in garages. One was shaved to the scalp. One had a silver beard trimmed close to the jaw. One had a scar along his right knuckles that ran from index finger to wrist, the kind that comes from work rather than violence, white and old, and settled into the skin like it had decided to stay. They did not crowd the room. They moved into it the way weather moves, filling the corners without hurrying, and the exits stayed open behind each of them. That detail registered in Hope's body before her mind had words for it. They were not trapping anyone. They were witnessing. The broad-shouldered man at the front looked past Hope and past the counter at the Harley leaning against the far bay wall with its side cover removed parts arranged on a red rag on the floor beside it. Steele came around the counter without being entirely sure he meant to stopping in the middle of the floor between his parts shelves and the visiting men. His voice when he used it had the particular edge of a man who knows that volume is his best remaining asset. Customer areas up front, he said. The man in the denim cut did not answer. He was looking at the motorcycle. Hope watched him and felt the old fear that had been bred into her from years of being a woman alone in places full of men who own things, the automatic recalibration of risk that happens before you have time to think it through. Men in biker cuts, heavy boots, greased dark hands. She thought they had come for the bike too. She thought this was the version of the afternoon that ended with her leaving with nothing. The man turned and looked at her, and she understood then that she had read him wrong. "That bike yours," he said. His voice was low and level, the kind of voice built for rooms that do not require performance. "Yes," Hope said. "It is mine." Then she said it again, steadier. "Yes, my name is on the title." The man nodded once and looked back at the motorcycle. He did not move toward it. Steele raised his voice. "Whatever you want with that bike, it is not yours to look at. It is in my shop on my time." The man turned back to Steele at a pace that suggested Steele's urgency had not transferred to him in any form. "What is wrong with it?" he said. "Engine is dead," Steele said. "Total rebuild needed more than the bike is worth. I made a fair offer on the scrap." The man looked at Hope. "You believe that?" he said. Hope opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked at the motorcycle leaning against the bay wall, her father's bike with its dull chrome and worn paint, and the thumbprint dent on the left side of the tank that she had never once thought about having fixed, because fixing it would mean making it something other than what it was. She looked at it and thought about the question. "I do not know enough to know what to believe," she said honestly. The man reached into his vest pocket and took out a folded cotton shop rag, dark from use, but clean on the inside fold. He placed it on the counter between them, not near the purchase form, not near the invoice, just on the edge of the plywood near the jar of valve caps. "I would like to look at it," he said to Hope, "with your permission." She looked at him for a long moment. The shop was quiet except for the buzzing strip light and the drizzle beginning outside and the distant sound of something metal expanding in the bay as the temperature dropped. The three men in their positions around the room had not moved. The exits were still clear. "What is your name?" she said. "Kane," he said. "Kane Flynn." He said it without adding anything else. No club name, no title, no explanation of why he was standing in a salvage shop in Harlan County on a Wednesday afternoon asking to look at a stranger's motorcycle. He just said his name the way a man says his name when he means it to be enough. Hope looked at the shop rag on the counter. "You can look," she said, "but it is not for sale." Kane Flynn nodded and moved toward the bike, unhurried the three men behind him, staying in their positions, the way clouds stay in formation, which is to say, apparently still, but present in a way that changes the quality of the air. Steele followed 3 steps behind Kane and stopped when he ran out of places to go that did not feel like retreat. Kane crouched beside the shovel head without touching it first. He looked at it with the patient attention of someone who understands that metal has a story and that the story requires reading rather than rushing. His eyes moved to the engine case, to the fuel line running along the frame, to the red rag on the floor, where the removed side cover lay beside 2 clean washers. He looked at the washers for a moment. Then he looked at the side cover. Then he looked at the floor around the bike, at the oil stains that mapped years of a machine being maintained in the same spot in someone's driveway, the particular geography of old leaks that never quite got to the metal underneath, because someone always caught them in time. He looked at all of this and said nothing for long enough that Steele started talking to fill the silence. The shop had gone quieter than shops usually go. There is a particular quality to the silence of a room where a judgment is being formed, different from the silence of an empty room or the silence of inattention. It has a texture to it, a hell-breath quality, because the people in it understand that something is being decided and that the decision will matter. The woman in the county maintenance shirt had set down the box of wiper blades she was holding, just set it on the edge of a shelf without looking at it, and had turned to face the bay. The 2 men in canvas work jackets had drifted a few inches closer to the counter, the way people drift towards something when it becomes clear that what they are watching is real. The drizzle outside had gathered into a thin, steady rain, and the sound of it on the salvage yard metal came through the open bay door as a low, continuous presence. The kind of weather that asks a room to pay attention. Old shovelheads shake themselves apart, Steele said. Bolts back off things, come loose. I have seen a dozen of them come through here. The compression was gone when she arrived. I ran a test and the numbers do not lie. Kane's eyes moved to the arrangement on the red rag. The two clean washers. The side cover set down neatly as if someone had removed it with care, rather than in the course of an emergency. When did you remove the side cover? Kane said. Today, Steele said. For the inspection. Kane reached down not to the engine but to the floor beside the bike and picked up the 9/16" wrench lying near the base of the frame. He turned it over in his palm. The handle was painted red. Your wrench, he said to Steele. Standard shop tool, Steele said. Kane looked at Hope. Your father worked on this himself, he said. Yes, she said. He kept his own tools, in coffee cans sorted by size. He painted the 9/16 handles red because he used them most. There was a pause, the kind of pause that has weight that falls into the room and changes the pressure of everything around it. Steele said plenty of wrenches come red. It is a common color for grip handles. Kane did not respond to that. He set the wrench down on the counter beside the drawer of valve caps and looked back at the motorcycle with the calm attention of a man who has just decided something, but who sees no value in announcing it prematurely. He stepped closer to the engine and crouched again lower this time. His knee on the concrete, one shoulder turned to block the light from the bay, so he could see into the shadowed space behind the frame rail. He looked for a long time without touching anything. Then he lifted two fingers and pointed at a spot just below and behind where the side cover had been mounted, a location invisible with the cover in place. There is a bolt here, he said. He pointed without touching. That bolt has been backed off recently. Not vibration, not age. It is clean on the threads and the seat is clear. Steele's voice came in quick. That was inspected. I told you I ran a full inspection. An inspection does not back a bolt off, Kane said. He gave Steele his own phrasing back low and without inflection. Different thing. Hope moved closer to the bike, close enough to see the place Kane was pointing. She could see the bolt head half hidden behind the frame rail, the way a key is half hidden when someone leaves it under a mat and thinks they have been clever about it. She looked at it and something shifted in her, not sudden, not dramatic, but the way a foundation shifts quietly and without announcement, and then everything built on it is different. What does that mean, she said. Kane stood up slowly and looked at her. He did not soften it. It means the engine did not fail on its own, he said. Hope stood very still. The strip light buzzed. Outside, the drizzle had become a thin, steady rain, and the sound of it on the salvage yard metal was a low, continuous tone, like something trying to make itself heard under everything else. The woman in the county maintenance shirt who had been standing near the bay wall, holding a box of wiper blades and pretending to look at a parts shelf, stopped pretending and turned to face the counter. The two men in canvas work jackets who had come in for estimates stood a little straighter. Steele said customer area is up front. You have no authority in my shop. Kane looked at Hope. It is her bike, he said. She gave me permission to look. He said it without looking at Steele. The sentence was finished before Steele had finished listening to it. I want to see the invoice again, Hope said. She went back to the counter and flattened the paper under her palms and read it again more slowly this time, because now she was reading it as a document rather than as a verdict. Diagnostic labor, fuel system inspection, fuel line section replaced at $220. The engine assessment in Steele's blocky handwriting, the red pen on the pending line, the circled 5 o'clock deadline. She had paid $220 for a fuel line replacement. She had paid $80 for the diagnostic. She was $300 into this shop before the 5 o'clock storage clock started, and the motorcycle was no closer to running, and the man behind the counter had a 9/16" wrench with a red painted handle lying on his parts shelf that had not come from his shop. The clarity of it hit her the way cold water hits all at once and everywhere. You told me the engine was dead, she said. Steele's jaw shifted. I told you what my inspection found. You found a disconnected bolt behind the side cover, Hope said. You wrote dead engine. The shop was quiet except for the rain and the light. Steele spread his hands and let his voice go to the adults near the bay. The customers, the woman in the maintenance shirt, the two men with the estimates, as if gathering witnesses for his own defense. Old machines do what old machines do, he said. I cannot be responsible for every mechanical interpretation. I gave a fair assessment and a fair offer. Kane reached down and picked up the wrench he had set on the counter. He looked at it once, then set it back down in a different position near the clean washers from the red rag, which he had placed on the counter, without ceremony while Steele was talking. The wrench, the washers, the invoice, all of it in the light. The shape of the lie was right there. Steele looked at the arrangement on the counter and looked at Kane and looked at Hope, and the calculation in his face shifted from confident to managing, which is the shift that happens when a man understands that the room has changed and starts deciding how to survive the change rather than how to win the argument. "May I try the engine?" Kane said to Hope. Hope looked at him. She looked at the motorcycle. She looked at the dent on the left side of the tank and thought about her father in the driveway, with his elbow catching the fence post and the sound the metal made, and how long he laughed about it. "Let me try it," she said. Kane looked at her. "Your father ever teach you the start routine?" he said. She was surprised by the question. Then she was not. "Fuel on," she said. "Choke set. No rushing the throttle." He said that every time. Kane stepped back from the bike and opened his hand toward it. "Then you do it," he said. "It is yours." Hope Cobb stood beside her father's motorcycle and felt the weight of everything the last 11 months had cost her settle into her shoulders, and she stood under it, and she put both hands on the grips, and she breathed. The shop watched. Steele started to say something, and the silver-bearded biker near the tire rack turned his head toward him, not threatening, not aggressive, just present, and Steele closed his mouth. Hope reached down to the fuel valve. Her fingers knew the position from childhood, from standing beside her father in the driveway, watching his hands move through the routine with the patient precision of a man who understood that machines ask for respect before they ask for anything else. "Fuel on," she said under her breath. She moved to the choke. Choke set. She did not rush the throttle. She put her hand to the starter and pressed it. The engine resisted for one breath, long enough for the whole shop to lean into the silence, and then it caught. The old shovel head shook itself awake with a deep mechanical vibration that went through the frame and up through the tank and into Hope's palms, and she felt it, the way she had not felt anything in 11 months, which was to say, she felt it everywhere all at once, like something coming back from a place it had never quite left. The vibration moved through the frame rails and into the tank and into her wrists and forearms, the way vibration from an old machine always does, not sharply but deeply, as if it is conducting something through you rather than merely shaking you. She knew that feeling. She had felt it the first time at 14 in a church parking lot on a Sunday morning with no one around. Her father walking beside her with his hand an inch from the grip but not touching it, letting her feel the weight and the balance and the particular living quality of a machine that has been running for years and knows how to run. She had been afraid of the weight, and she had been afraid of the speed, even though they were only in a parking lot, and her father had said, "Let her do the work. She knows what she is doing, you just have to let her." She had let the motorcycle do the work. She was letting it do the work now. Receipts lifted at their corners on the counter. A stack of parts boxes shivered on the shelf. The hanging air hose swayed an inch. Steele's face drained and then flooded. The engine ran. The woman in the county maintenance shirt looked at the invoice still flat on the counter, at the line that said engine failure beyond economical repair, and then she looked at Charles Steele, and the look on her face was the kind that builds slowly and then becomes a permanent feature. Kane stood half a step behind Hope's right shoulder and said nothing. He had done the thing that needed doing, which was to make space for the truth to exist in a room that had been built to prevent it. His three men had not moved from their positions. The exits were still open. The room was still hers. Hope let the engine run until Kane lifted two fingers, and then she turned the key back. The old shovel head settled into stillness. The shop was very quiet. The rain came down outside on the salvage yard, and in the quiet after the engine stopped, the only sound was the drizzle and the strip light buzzing, and Charles Steele's breathing, which had gotten shallow and audible, in the way of a man who has just understood that the ground beneath his feet is not the ground he thought it was. The woman in the county maintenance shirt looked at the invoice again. "You wrote dead engine," she said. The man in the canvas jacket pointed at the loosened side cover and the clean washers on the red rag and offered scrap price before 5. Steele opened his mouth, then closed it. Hope picked up her father's title folder from where she had set it on the end of the counter. The folder was soft at the corners, the clear plastic sleeve inside gone cloudy with age, and her father's name was still on the older registration copy tucked behind her own transfer form. She held the folder against her chest with both hands. She looked at Charles Steele. He looked back at her. The engine had said everything. The silence after the engine settled had a texture to it. It was the kind of silence that accumulates slowly, adding weight from every direction, and it asked everyone in the room to decide what they were going to do with what they had just heard. Steele was the first to speak, which was a mistake because the wrong words at that moment were worse than no words. That does not prove anything he said. His voice had lost the architecture of authority it had carried for the previous hour. What remained was something thinner, built more from habit than from fact. Kane Flynn turned from the motorcycle and looked at him with an expression that was not hostile and was not sympathetic and was not anything except clear. "You wrote beyond economical repair," Kane said. "You offered 600 for scrap. You put a 5 o'clock deadline on storage." He paused. "And that bolt was sitting loose behind the cover you removed." Steele said old bikes vibrate. Bolts back off on their own. Everybody in the business knows that. The woman in the county maintenance shirt, whose name was Janet Dalton, and who had come in for wiper blades and had been standing long enough to feel part of what was unfolding, set her box down on the counter and looked at Steele with a steadiness that suggested she had spent years reading the kind of paperwork that determines whose version of events becomes the official one. "You wrote dead engine," Janet Dalton said, "on the invoice, in writing, and the engine runs." "Private business," Steele said, his voice sharpening at the corners. No, Hope said. She said it quietly. She had said a lot of things quietly today, and some of them had come out wrong. Thin and apologetic, squeezed through the exhaustion of 3 shifts and 11 months of doing everything by herself. But this one came out right. It had the particular tone of a woman who has located the line she is not moving past. "This is my receipt," Hope said, "and this is my motorcycle, and I am not signing your form." One of the men in canvas work jackets spoke from near the bay wall, a heavy-set man who had come in for an alternator estimate and had been watching the shop shift around him for the past 15 minutes. "I brought my truck in Tuesday," he said. "You told me the alternator bracket was cracked, said I needed a full replacement." He looked at Steele. "I want that estimate in writing before I leave today." The second canvas jacket man looked at the service board on the bay wall. "Same for me," he said. Steele looked at the two of them, and then at Janet Dalton, and then at the 3 bikers in their positions, and then at Kane, and what happened to his face in that sequence was the particular collapse of a man who has spent years relying on the fact that people usually cannot afford to wait around long enough to see the whole picture. They come in worried they get handed a number and they leave. He had built a business model on the reliably brief attention span of people with more problems than time. Today the room had decided to pay attention. Kane picked up the red-handled 9/16 wrench from the counter and placed it beside the clean washers on the red rag. Parts that had been removed. Parts that told a specific story about a specific sequence of events if you were willing to look at them in the right order. "Tell her what it costs," Kane said to Steele. "Not the scrap price, what she is owed." Steele's face went through 3 different expressions in rapid succession, the last of which landed somewhere around cornered. He reached under the counter and brought out a narrow cardboard tray. In it were the side cover screws, the 2 washers, and a small clamp with a smear of yellow paint on the head. He set it on the counter with the aggression of a man doing something under duress. "Side cover components," he said. Hope looked at the tray. She checked the pieces against the bike the way her father had taught her, methodically, one at a time. He had shown her how to do this when she was 9 years old, standing beside the bike in the driveway on a Saturday morning with nowhere to be, and all the patience in the world picking up each small piece and naming it and telling her what it did and why it mattered. He said, "Every machine tells the truth if you listen long enough." She set the tray beside the title folder. "The fuel line you charged me for," she said. "It is installed," Steele said. "That is real work." "I did not authorize you to replace the fuel line," Hope said. "I authorized a diagnostic. The invoice says inspection. It does not say replacement." Steele's jaw shifted. Kane said nothing. He had said what needed saying. Now he stood with his oil-dark hands quiet at his sides and let Hope run the conversation, because it was her conversation to run, and he was aware of the difference between helping someone and taking over for them, and he had learned that difference the hard way a long time ago. Hope looked at the invoice and then at Steele. "Cancel the storage fee," she said. "Correct the engine assessment. Return every part you took off this bike, and refund what you charged me for a fuel line I never authorized." Steele looked at the invoice pad. The 2 customers near the bay were watching him. Janet Dalton's hands were flat on the counter near Hope's receipt, not touching it, but there. The 3 Brotherhood members in their positions around the room had not moved, had not spoken, had not done anything that could be called a threat, and somehow that was the most effective thing they could have done because the only pressure in the room was the pressure of being seen clearly by multiple people who intended to remember what they saw. Steele pulled the invoice pad toward him and began to write with short, tight strokes. Storage fee waived. Engine assessment corrected. Prior notation of failure beyond economical repair does not reflect actual engine condition at time of inspection. Removed components returned to customer. He pushed the pad toward Hope. She read each line. Then she looked at the paid items on the original invoice. The fuel line, she said again. Steele opened the cash drawer. He counted out $220 in 20s and 10s and a folded $5 bill for the clamp charge he had added that morning as a line item so small he had assumed she would not notice it. He placed the money on the counter. Hope counted it. She did not do it fast. She held each bill and looked at it and thought about the 3 shifts and what they cost and what they bought and what they did not buy. $220. It was not enough to fix the tire. It was not enough to cover a month of utilities at her father's house. It was not the invoice. It was not the damage. It was not 11 months of grief compacted into a service record and a scrap offer and a circled deadline. But it was the money that Steele had taken without authorization and had handed back because the room would not let him keep it. And that meant something that was distinct from the dollar amount and larger than it, and she thought about that as she counted the bills and felt their particular weight in her hand. When she had counted all of it, she folded it once and put it in her coat pocket beside the original receipt. She picked up the corrected invoice. She picked up the title folder. She looked at Kane. He was watching her with the patient attention he had given the motorcycle, not trying to read anything into her face, just looking at it the way you look at something when you want to understand it rather than use it. "I need to get the bike home," she said. Kane nodded. He reached into the pocket of his denim cut and took out a business card, plain white, with a name in small print. Carver's Garage, Elmore Road, and below that a phone number. He turned it over and wrote something on the back with a dull pencil from the counter. He offered it to her. "Man named Weston Carver," Kane said. "He runs that garage 40 miles south. He knew your father." Hope's hand stopped on the way to taking the card. What she said, Kane held the card steady. "He knew William Cobb," Kane said. "He will tell you that himself." Hope took the card. She turned it over and looked at the number on the back and then at Kane's face, and there was something in the steadiness of his expression that told her the thing he had just said was not a small thing. It was a thread that if she pulled, it would unravel something she had not known was tied. "What do you mean he knew him?" she said. Kane looked at the motorcycle, at the dent on the left side of the tank, at the worn chrome and the dull black paint, and the small details of a machine maintained for decades by the same careful hands. "We ride this road every fall," he said. "Been doing it for 30 years. Some roads you ride because you have somewhere to be," he said. "Some roads you ride because the road is the point. This one is the second kind." He paused and looked toward the salvage yard at the line of Brotherhood bikes in the rain. "When a man rides a road for years and then the road just goes quiet one October, people notice. I rode past this shop 2 years ago and saw a shovel head in the yard that I thought I recognized. I came back a week later and it was gone. Today I looked through the bay door and saw the same bike against the same wall." He looked at her. "Your father rode with us a long time ago, before you were born, before a lot of things." The shop was very quiet. Hope held the card in both hands. She looked at her father's name in her mind and then at the motorcycle in front of her and tried to assemble the information into a shape she recognized. Her father. The Brotherhood. A long time ago. She turned the words over the way you turn metal in your hand when you are trying to understand its weight. Her father had never mentioned a motorcycle club. He had mentioned the bike and the mill and the road, and the weather and the specific sound a shovelhead makes when the timing is right, which he said was a sound somewhere between a heartbeat and a prayer. And she had always thought he was being poetic. Maybe he had been. Maybe he had also been describing something more literal than she understood. "Kane," she said. He looked at her. "Why did you come in here today?" she said. Kane glanced at the salvage yard through the bay door at the rain and the fence, and the old vehicles rusting in the brown grass beyond it. "Saw a girl fighting a man across his own counter about a bike I recognize," he said. He looked at the dent on the tank. "Your father used to say that dent was the best thing that ever happened to that tank. Said it gave the bike a face." Hope made a sound she did not intend to make. It was small and involuntary, the sound of something surfacing from a place that has been underwater for a long time. He did say that, she said. Yes, Kane said. He did. They stood in the rain-gray light of the salvage shop with the corrected invoice and the title folder and the motorcycle between them, and Hope felt the 11 months of alone begin to alter slightly. Not disappear, not resolve into anything neat, but shift the way weight shifts when someone puts a hand under something heavy without taking it away from you just enough to let you breathe. The Brotherhood cleared the aisle without touching steel or his counter-moving tires in a bent drip pan, so Hope could walk the old Harley out under her own name. The silver-bearded biker checked the front tire with a pocket gauge, the needle settling at 28 pounds low, but safe for rolling to the truck. The biker with the scar on his knuckles lifted the side cover tray and handed it to Hope with both hands, like even the smallest piece deserved to come home. Kane stayed beside the tank, one palm resting near the dent her father had left there. Do not ride it far today, he said. Get it to Carver. He will do right by it. Hope took the card carefully and put it in her coat pocket. They walked the old Harley through Steele's shop and out into the October drizzle, and the salvage yard received them in the dull gray light, the stacked tires dark with rain. The gravel turned to brown shine under their boots, and the line of Brotherhood motorcycles waited along the fence like patient evidence of something that had been in motion a long time before today. The road south of Harlan County opened up after the second ridge, where the tree line dropped away on the right side and the valley came into view below, wide and gray. In the October rain, the kind of view her father had always said you only got by going over something first. Hope did not ride the motorcycle. She rode in the cab of the borrowed truck with the shovel head secured in the bed behind her, and she watched the valley through the rain-streaked windshield, and she thought about a man she thought she knew. Your father rode with us, Kane had said, a long time ago, before you were born. She had spent 26 years knowing her father as William Cobb of Harlan County mill worker. Amateur mechanic man who sorted his wrenches by size and painted the handles of the ones he used most so he could find them in the dark. She had known him as a man who cooked eggs on Sunday mornings and kept a weather eye on the roof and fixed the fence when the deer pushed through it and rode his motorcycle to work regardless of what the sky was doing. She had known him as the man who taught her how to read an engine and how to change a tire and how to stand in a room full of people who were trying to make her feel smaller than she was and hold her ground without making a scene. She had not known him as someone who had ridden with the Brotherhood. She thought about the coffee cans sorted by size, and the wrenches with red handles, and the way he always knew which one to reach for without thinking about it. And she wondered if that precision, that exact calibrated knowledge of the tools and the machines had come from the Brotherhood years, or if it had always been in him, and the Brotherhood had simply given it a direction. She did not know the answer, and she was not sure the answer was separable from the man. Some things about a person cannot be extracted from the life they lived and examined in isolation. They are only legible inside the whole. She pulled off Route 18 at the junction with Elmore Road and sat with the engine running and the rain on the roof and looked at the business card Kane had pressed into her hand outside the salvage yard. The front said Carver's Garage in plain type. On the back, in the dull pencil marks of a man writing on his knee, was a phone number and 3 words he will understand. She dialed. The phone rang 5 times, and then a man answered with a voice that sounded like it had been lived in for a long time, the voice of someone who had learned to take information in without reacting to it immediately. Carver's, the voice said. My name is Hope Cobb, she said. William Cobb's daughter. Kane Flynn gave me your number. A pause. Not a blank pause, but a loaded one, the kind of pause that contains something being located and brought to the surface from a long way down. Hope Cobb, the man said. He said it once like confirming something. I will be here until 6. She drove the remaining 12 miles on Elmore Road, with the rain easing off and the road running through a corridor of bare-limbed oaks that made the afternoon look older than it was. Carver's Garage sat back from the road on a gravel apron, a low metal building with 2 bay doors and a hand-lettered sign that looked like it had not been touched since the 90s. The office window had a neon open sign that was not lit, but both bay doors were up and the light inside was working, and a man was standing in the near bay, wiping his hands on a red shop rag when Hope pulled in. Weston Carver was somewhere in his late 60s, lean in the way of men who have never stopped moving, with white hair, cut short, and the kind of hands that have done real work for so long that the work is visible in the shape of them. He looked at the truck and then at the covered load in the bed, and his face did something quiet and specific that Hope could not entirely name. He walked to the truck bed without being asked and lifted the tarp at the corner and looked at the motorcycle for a long moment. "She let you keep it," he said. Hope got out of the cab. "Steele had it," she said. "He was going to write it off as scrap." Kane showed up. Carver let the tarp down carefully. He looked at Hope, and again his face did the thing she could not quite name, which was the expression of someone looking at a person and seeing another person in them. "You look like him," Carver said. He said it gently, not as a compliment or a judgment, just as a fact being spoken aloud for the first time in a room that could hold it. "People used to say that," Hope said. Carver nodded and led her into the near bay, which smelled of clean oil and metal shavings and the particular kind of order that comes from a man who has been working alone in the same space for a long time. Tools were hung on pegboard in their outlines. The floor was swept. The lift in the center bay was clean on the platform. "You want coffee?" he said. "Please," Hope said. He had a drip machine on a shelf near the office door, and he poured 2 mugs without asking how she took it. He held one out and then sat on a rolling stool near the pegboard wall, and Hope sat on the metal stool by the tool chest, and they were arranged in the bay, the way 2 people arrange themselves when they have something important to say and have not yet decided the order in which to say it. Kane called ahead, Carver said. She had assumed as much. "How long have you known him?" she asked. 30 years, give or take." He looked at his mug. "Your father and I were in the Brotherhood together. Long before Kane. Different chapter president back then, man named Doyle Briggs. Gone now. Most of them are." Hope held her mug with both hands. She thought of Earl Briggs, the biker with the scar on his knuckles. She did not say it yet. "My father never told me," she said. Carver nodded as if he had been expecting this. "He left the club when you were born," Carver said. "That was his choice, and it was not a small one. He gave us back his patch in person. He said he had a daughter, and he did not want her growing up with that weight on her." He looked at Hope. He meant it as a kindness. Hope thought about the 28 years of riding to the mill in all weather. The coffee cans sorted by size. The wrenches with red handles. The thing her father called the old girl and what he had meant by it. "He never stopped riding," she said. "No," Carver said. "He never did. He kept the bike and he kept the road. He just let go of the rest." Hope looked at the bay wall, at the pegboard, and with its careful outlines, each tool in its place. She thought about what it meant to let go of something and keep the part that was already in your blood. She thought about what Kane had said in Steele's shop, standing at the counter with the red-handled wrench in his palm. "Before you were born," he had said, "for a lot of things." She had heard it as a mystery at first, but sitting in Carver's Bay now with the smells of a working garage around her and a man who had known her father for 30 years on the other side of a cup of coffee, she understood it differently. It was not a mystery. It was a sequence. A man becomes something. A man decides to become something else. The earlier self does not disappear. It stays inside the later one the way an engine stays inside a machine running, whether you think about it or not. Her father had carried the Brotherhood years inside the mill, years inside the driveway, years inside the kitchen doorway, years, and what she had always seen was only the outermost layer. The man standing in the rain still grinning, and below that layer were all the other men he had been before he became that one. "Why did Kane come in today?" she said. "To Steele's." Carver turned his mug in his hands. "We ride that road every October," he said. "Your father used to ride it with us before. Kane has not forgotten that. None of them have." He looked at her. "When Kane called me, he said the bike was the same one, that he knew it by the dent." Hope felt the familiar pressure behind her eyes that she had been managing all day with varying degrees of success. "It means you are not a stranger," Carver said before she could ask. "Not to them." He stood and moved toward the bay door. "And it means that bike deserves a proper look before you put it back on the road." Hope watched him and thought about the last 11 months. The 3 shifts, the $43, the corrected invoice folded inside her coat, the card in her hand with 3 words on the back, "He will understand." "Can I be here while you work?" she said. "My father always let me stand by while he worked. He said you learn more watching than asking." Carver looked at her. "Your father was right about that," he said. "And yes, you can stay as long as you need." He helped her unload the motorcycle from the truck with an efficiency that told her he had done this many times, and he rolled it into the bay under the lights and put it on the center stand. He began to look at it the way a man looks at something he has known before and is now encountering again after a long time. He found the bolt Kane had identified behind the side cover and examined the thread in the seat and nodded to himself without saying anything for a moment. Then he said Steele did this deliberately. I know, Hope said. It is not the first time, Carver said. He pulled a shop stool close and sat and looked at the engine. 2 years ago, a woman named Ackridge brought a Honda Shadow in there, 68-year-old widow, living alone. Steele told her the frame was cracked. She sold it for $250. Carver picked up a small flashlight and aimed it at the lower engine mount. He knew the bike. He knew the woman. He knew she could not afford to push back. What happened? Hope said. Nothing happened, Carver said. That is the point. Nobody pushed back. Hope thought about Janet Dalton setting her wiper blades on the counter and keeping her palm on the invoice so it could not disappear. She thought about the two men in canvas jackets asking for printed estimates. She thought about the way the room had changed once multiple people started paying attention at the same time. Something happened today, she said. Carver glanced at her with the small, specific expression of a man who is pleased but does not want to make a performance of it. Yes, he said, it did. He worked through the motorcycle methodically over the next 2 hours, checking each system with the quiet focus of someone who knows the machine well enough to hear what it is trying to say. He adjusted the rear brake, which was soft and needed a cable tension correction. He checked the tire for age cracks and confirmed what Kane had said about not putting the bike on the road until new rubber was on. He inspected the fuel line Steele claimed to have replaced and found that it had been installed, at least, which was the one honest service the man had provided for the $220 Hope had been charged. He worked, and Hope sat on the stool beside him and watched and asked questions when she had them and did not ask questions when she did not. And somewhere in the second hour, she felt the particular kind of tiredness that is different from exhaustion. The tiredness that comes when you have been holding yourself tense for a long time, and something gives not the problem, not the difficulty, but the isolation of it. She had not understood until this evening how much of the weight she had been carrying for 11 months was not grief in the simple sense, but the specific compound weight of grief held alone without anyone who had known William Cobb the way she had known him, or the way Carver had known him, or the way Kane had known him, from a mile of road in the rain, riding side by side in silence. She had known her father as her father. These men had known him as someone else, a younger man, a man in motion, and between their knowledge and hers was the whole architecture of a life that was more complicated and more inhabited than she had understood. And knowing that did not make the grief smaller, but it made it different. Spread across more people, shared out, lightened by distribution into a thing that was still heavy, but was no longer entirely hers to carry alone. At some point, Carver said, "Your father used to sit exactly like that, right knee over left, both hands on the mug." Hope looked at her hands. She was sitting exactly like that. "Did he talk about me?" she said, "when he was with the club?" "All the time," Carver said. "He talked about you the way some men talk about the road, like you were both the destination and the reason to go." Hope looked at the floor of the bay for a moment, at the clean concrete and the thin shadow of the motorcycle on the lift, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and breathed until she could breathe normally again. Carver kept working and did not comment on this, which was the right thing to do. He finished his inspection and came around the bike and stood beside her with his hands folded in a shop rag. "She needs tires," he said, "rear brake cable, valve check, and a new set of plug wires. The engine is sound, the frame is sound. Everything Steele told you was a lie except the fuel line, and he charged you double for that." He looked at her directly. "I can do the work you need for $600 in parts and labor." Not because Kane asked, because your father would have done it for any of us and never asked what it cost. Hope looked at the money she had returned from Steele, $220, folded in her coat. She looked at the corrected invoice. She looked at the motorcycle. "I do not have 600 today," she said. Carver said, "I know." He handed her the shop rag to wipe her hands, even though they were not dirty because it was something to hold. "Bring it in when you can," he said. "The bike is not going anywhere." Hope took the rag and held it for a moment before setting it on the tool chest. She was about to say something when her phone rang. The number on the screen was one she did not recognize, local exchange, and she almost did not answer it because her day had been long enough. But she answered. "Ms. Cobb." The voice was a man's, formal, with the careful intonation of someone reading from a script of their own making. "My name is Arthur Greer. I am a deputy with Harlan County. We have received a complaint from a Charles Steele at Steele's Auto and Salvage alleging that a group of individuals entered his premises today and coerced him into modifying a business transaction. He has named you as a party. Hope was very still. Carver watched her face and set down his flashlight. She said Charles Steele told me my father's motorcycle had a dead engine. A man named Kane Flynn looked at the bike and found a bolt that had been deliberately disconnected behind the side cover. The engine started when the bolt was replaced. I have a corrected invoice in Steele's own handwriting acknowledging the error. I have multiple witnesses. The deputy said, I understand. I need to ask you to come in and give a statement. Can I bring my documentation, she said. That would be helpful, yes. She ended the call and looked at Carver. Steele called the police, she said. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he is scared. Scared men do that. He reached for his phone. Give me a moment, he said. He dialed. Hope heard 2 rings, then Kane's voice low and clear, even through the small speaker, saying one word, Carver. Steele filed a complaint, Carver said. Deputy Greer, they want Hope to come in. A pause. We will come, Kane said. Not necessary, Carver said. But she should know you would. He looked at Hope and she heard Kane's voice say, tell her we will come if she wants us. Tell her it is her call. Carver held the phone toward her. Hope took it. You heard that, Kane said. She said, I heard it. What do you want to do? Hope thought about the morning, about the 3 shifts and the $43, and the way she had stood at Steele's counter with both palms on the plywood and said, I am not selling it, and the way the words came out thin, but held anyway. She thought about what it meant to have people behind you without needing them to stand in front of you. I will go to the station and give the statement, she said. I have the invoice. I have the witnesses. I can do this myself. Kane said, I know you can. She handed the phone back to Carver. He spoke to Kane for another 30 seconds, then ended the call and looked at her with the same expression he had used when she drove in. She could name it now. It was the look of someone recognizing something they thought they had lost. She drove to the county office on Route 7 with the corrected invoice on the passenger seat and the title folder beside it and the business card from Carver's garage in her coat pocket. She walked in through the glass door and told the woman at the desk her name and why she was there, and she sat in the plastic chair they pointed her to and waited. The deputy who came out to meet her was not Arthur Greer, who had apparently gone off shift, but a woman named Perez, stocky and direct, who looked at the invoice and at the title and at Hope's written account of the afternoon with the same professional attention that Janet Dalton had given the paperwork at Steele's counter. She took the statement in under 20 minutes. The complaint alleges coercion, Deputy Perez said. Based on what you have given me, what I am seeing is a business dispute with documentation supporting your account. She looked at Hope. Is there anything Mr. Steele told you that was true? He did replace the fuel line, Hope said. Perez made a note. He charged you for it. Double the going rate, Hope said. But he did install it. Perez nodded. That is important for your account to include. It keeps the picture accurate. Hope looked at her. Yes, she said. It does. She signed the statement at 5:47 in the evening and walked back out through the glass door into the October night, which had gone fully dark while she was inside. The process had been straightforward and had taken less time than she expected, and as she walked across the parking lot, she thought about how the straightforward version of a thing is often not available on the first try, that you sometimes have to walk into a shop and stand at a counter and refuse to sign a form before the straightforward version becomes possible. She thought about all the people who had walked into Steele's shop before her and had signed the form and driven home with a number in their head that felt like the cost of grief, but was actually the cost of someone else's dishonesty. And she thought about the woman named Ackridge that Carver had mentioned, 68 years old and alone, who had sold a bike for $250 because she could not afford to push back. She thought, I pushed back. It was a small thought, and she did not make a performance of it. She just held it for a moment in the parking lot under the 2 pole lights, and then she put it away and got in the truck. The parking lot was lit by 2 pole lights and smelled of wet asphalt and cold air. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she now recognized as Kane's. It said, statement done. She texted back, done, sign. His reply came in 4 seconds. Good. She stood in the parking lot for a moment with the phone in her hand and the cold air on her face and thought about the day she had just been through. She thought about standing at Steele's counter that morning with $43 and a borrowed truck and a bike that a man had told her was dead, and about standing in Carver's garage 2 hours later, hearing a man tell her that her father had talked about her the way some men talk about the road. She got in the truck and drove back to the apartment on Route 18 and she sat in the parking lot with the engine off for a while before she went inside because she was not ready yet to be alone in a room with what she had learned today, and the truck was not exactly company, but it was warmer than the parking lot, and it would do for now. She fell asleep on the couch this time with her boots off, and she slept for 7 hours, which was the longest she had slept in weeks, and she did not dream about anything she could remember in the morning. What she woke up to was a voicemail from a number she did not recognize. It had come in at 11 in the evening while she slept. The voice was a woman's, a little older, with the particular cadence of someone making a call they have been putting off. "Ms. Cobb," the voice said, "my name is Janet Dalton. I was at Steele's today. You may remember me. I had the wiper blades." She paused. "I have been meaning to call since I left. I want to tell you something about Charles Steele that I think you need to know. Please call me back when you get a chance. It is not urgent, but it is important." Hope listened to the message twice in the early morning light of the apartment, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her coffee going warm in her hands, and then she pressed call. Janet Dalton answered on the second ring as if she had been waiting. "Thank you for calling," Janet said. "I know it is early." "I was awake," Hope said, which was true. "What did you want to tell me?" Janet was quiet for a moment, the careful quiet of a woman organizing her thoughts before she commits them to words. "I work for county maintenance," she said. "Roads and infrastructure. Part of my job is permit review for commercial properties. Steele's has had 3 complaints filed against them in the past 4 years. 2 were dismissed because the customers did not follow up. 1 went to the licensing board and was dropped when Steele amended his service records." She paused. "I have seen the pattern before, Ms. Cobb. What he did to you yesterday was not the first time he has done it." Hope looked at the corrected invoice on the kitchen table. "I figured," she said. "What you may not know," Janet continued, "is that Steele has a buyer, a dealer in the next county who specializes in vintage iron. Steele scouts for him at salvage rates, sells at market rates, and keeps the difference." She paused again. "He has moved at least 6 motorcycles through that arrangement in the past 2 years. 1 was a 1971 Sportster that belonged to a man who died and left it to his grandson. The grandson was 19 and did not know what it was worth." Hope was very still. "The parts," she said. Janet said, "What?" "The parts from my father's bike," Hope said. "The one Steele removed. He gave me back the side cover and the washers and the clamp. But there were other things. The original carburetor is gone. The voltage regulator was replaced with something generic. I noticed when Weston Carver was going over the bike last night." There was a pause on Janet's end. "That is not covered in the complaint you filed," Janet said. "No," Hope said, "because I did not know yet when I was at the station." She was thinking quickly now, the exhaustion pushed to one side by something that felt like momentum. She thought about the original carburetor on a 1974 Shovelhead, which was a specific part with a specific value, and about the voltage regulator that Carver had identified as a replacement, and about a dealer in the next county who specialized in vintage iron. She thought about 6 motorcycles moved through a salvage arrangement in 2 years. She thought about the owner of a 1971 Sportster who had been 19 years old and did not know what it was worth. "I need to talk to Weston Carver," she said. Janet said, "I think that is right. I also think you should call the deputy you spoke with yesterday, the one named Perez." Hope said, "Why Perez and not Greer?" Janet was quiet for a moment. "Greer is who Steele called," she said. "Perez is who helped you. Sometimes that tells you something." Hope said that she understood, and she thought she did. She called Carver at 7:15 in the morning. He picked up before the second ring. She had been awake since 5:30. The apartment still dark outside the windows, and the coffee already made sitting at the kitchen table with the shoebox in front of her, and the cloth bag on the table beside it, and the photographs spread out under the kitchen light. She had been looking at the photographs of her father in his 20s for an hour before she picked up the phone, not studying them, not trying to extract information from them, just looking at a man she had known all her life and was still in the process of meeting. There is a version of a parent that a child carries composed of what the child witnessed, and then there is the version that existed before the child, and between those 2 versions is the whole private country of a life that belongs to no one but the person who lived it. She thought she was beginning to see the borders of that country now, and the sight of it did not diminish her father, but expanded him, which was the strange and difficult gift of the shoebox and the patch and the men on the October road. "I was going to call you," he said. "I went back over the inventory I did on the bike last night. The carburetor is not the original. The regulator is not original. and one of the frame bolts near the headstock has a newer replacement head on it, different manufacturer than the others. Hope said Janet Dalton called me. She knows steel has a buyer. Carver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Kane needs to know this. Yes, Hope said, he does. She paused. But I want to be the one to call him. She heard Carver exhale a sound that was almost, but not quite a laugh. Your father would have said the same thing he said. Hope dialed Kane's number. It rang 3 times. When he answered, she told him everything, and he listened without interrupting, which was the first thing she noticed, that he did not try to fill the space while she was talking, or anticipate the end of her sentences, or redirect her toward a conclusion she had not yet reached. He simply listened, and the quality of his listening was the same quality she had seen in him at Steele's. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. How many parts, he said. Carver found 3 specific replacements, Hope said. The carburetor, the voltage regulator, and 1 frame bolt. There may be more. Kane said, did your father have any photos of the bike? Old ones. She thought about this. There is a shoebox, she said, in the closet at his house. I have not been through it yet. There was a particular weight to that sentence that she felt even as she said it. Her father's house was still her father's house 11 months after he had stopped living in it, because the question of what to do with it had been one of the many questions she had not yet had the bandwidth to answer. She paid the utilities. She went by once a week to check the pipes and the roof. She had not gone through the closets. Can you get to it today? Kane said. Yes, Hope said. I can get to it today. She ended the call and sat in the truck for a moment with the phone in her hand. She thought about the closet in her father's bedroom, the shelves she had not touched, the boxes she had not opened, the entire closed geography of a life she had been preserving intact for 11 months, because opening it felt like the last step of something she was not ready to finish. She thought about the shoebox and what it might contain, and why her father had put it on the high shelf, where only someone looking for it would find it. She thought about the fact that she was apparently someone looking for it. She put the truck in gear and drove to the house on the gravel road off Route 18, and the trees along the road were bare now, in the October cold, their branches making the particular skeletal pattern against the gray sky that always made her think of lace, or of systems, the way complexity organizes itself into something that looks simple from a distance. She drove to her father's house, which was 12 miles off Route 18 on a gravel road that climbed along the east face of the ridge, and then dipped into a small hollow where the house sat back from the road, with the barn beyond it and the creek beyond that. The house was a white clapboard 2-story that her father had repainted every 7 years without fail, and the last coat had gone on the spring before he died. So the paint was still clean and the trim was still white, and the house looked from the road like a place where someone still lived, which was either a comfort or a problem depending on the day. She let herself in with the key she kept on the same ring as her truck key, and stood in the kitchen for a moment before she went anywhere else. The kitchen still smelled of the particular combination of coffee and wood oil and the specific brand of dish soap her father had used for 30 years, a smell that hit her somewhere behind the breastbone every time she came in, and that she had not found a way to become accustomed to. She went upstairs. The shoebox was on the top shelf of the bedroom closet above the hung shirts she had not touched, and the folded sweaters on the shelf below, and the boots lined up at the bottom with their toes pointing out the way he always kept them, the small habits of order that persisted in the space a person left behind. She stood on the footstool from the bathroom to reach the box, and she carried it downstairs to the kitchen table and sat down with it. Inside the shoebox was the archaeology of a particular kind of life. A man's life lived largely in the same small geography, leaving behind the sediment of 30 years, in a box that was not organized but was not entirely random, either the way the contents of a working drawer accumulate, according to a logic that makes sense only to the person who added to it. There were photographs. She lifted them out carefully in handfuls and spread them on the kitchen table. The early ones she did not recognize. Her father in his 20s, leaner, and with a beard he had not worn since standing with groups of men in front of motorcycles or beside roads or in what looked like parking lots outside bars or at cookouts with long tables. The patches on the vests were visible in some of the photos but blurred in others, and she looked for the word Brotherhood and found it twice, once on a back patch she could half read in a photo of 4 men standing in front of a water tower, and once on the side of a van in the background of a group shot that she studied for a long time before she found her father's face in it, third from the left, grinning with his hat pushed back. He looked happy, Not of the careful, settled happiness she associated with him in her memory, the happiness of a man who has chosen his life and made his peace with it, but something more open, more unguarded, the happiness of someone who is still in the middle of becoming himself and does not yet know how it comes out. She spread the photos across the table and photographed each one with her phone. In the bottom of the shoebox under the photos and a rubber-banded stack of old registration cards and a folded topo map of the county road system with 3 or 4 junctions circled in pencil, she found a small cloth bag tied with a drawstring. She untied the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. It was a patch, a cut-down patch shaped to fit a vest pocket rather than a back panel, the Brotherhood name in faded thread on a black ground with a small emblem below it, an oak and a road, and a number that might have been a chapter number or a year. The thread was worn in the center where a thumb must have touched it over years. The edges were frayed the way fabric frays when it has been folded and unfolded many times. She sat at the kitchen table with the patch in her palm for a long time. Then she photographed it too, and put everything back in the box and carried the box to the truck with her. She sent the photos to Kane's number, with a text that said, "Found the shoebox." His reply came in 2 minutes. "Can you bring it to Carver's?" She was already on the road. Carver was finishing his second pass of the motorcycle when she arrived. He had the bike up on the lift and was checking the headstock bolt with a pair of calipers when she came through the bay door, and he looked up and then looked at the shoebox under her arm and nodded toward the stool. Hope sat. She set the box on the tool chest and opened it without preamble and took out the cloth bag and handed it to Carver. He untied the drawstring and tilted the patch into his palm and went very still. He turned the patch over and looked at the back where the stitching showed through the background, and a small handwritten notation in faded ink was visible near the bottom edge. Numbers 2 sets separated by a dash, which was the format of the club's old member registration chapter and sequence. He looked at Hope. "I stitched this," he said. What she said. When a member left, Carver said, "We cut down their back patch. Kept the name, removed the full panel. The pocket size meant they still carried it, but they were not claiming the patch on the road." He turned it over again. "I stitched this one. I remember it because William asked me to use the oak on the emblem. He said the oak was for you." Hope looked at the patch, the oak, and the road. She thought about what it might mean for a man to carry a reminder of the thing he gave up and why he would carry it in a cloth bag, in a shoebox on a shelf, rather than leave it somewhere it could not be found. It was not shame, she understood. It was privacy. The difference between hiding something and keeping it for yourself. "You kept records of all the members," she said. Carver set the patch on the tool chest beside the shoebox. "We kept records," he said. "Your father's number was Chapter 4, Sequence 12. He was the 12th member of the 4th chapter before the chapters were consolidated." He looked at her. The consolidation happened the year after he left. The whole regional network came under one name after that. That was when Kane took the presidency. "How many members total?" Hope said. 4 chapters, Carver said. Combined membership was over 140 at the peak. After consolidation, it settled to about 80 writing members. He paused. "Most of them have never met you, but they know your father's name." Hope looked at this information and tried to understand its shape. 80 men who knew her father's name. A patch stitched with an oak because her father said the oak was for her. A history that had been sitting in a shoebox on a shelf while she worked 3 shifts and tried to save a motorcycle and held herself upright by pressing both palms on a plywood counter. A knock at the open bay door. Kane Flynn stood in the entrance with the October light behind him and his denim cut dark from a day's riding and a manila envelope in his right hand. Carver said, "Come in." Kane came in and set the envelope on the tool chest beside the patch. He looked at Hope. "I made some calls this morning," he said. "The vintage dealer Janet Dalton mentioned his name as Rollins. He operates out of a warehouse on the county line, mostly mail order and private sale. He is not hard to find." He looked at the envelope. "I sent 2 of my guys there this morning, just to look, not to do anything, just to look." He opened the envelope and took out 3 printed photographs, the kind taken on a phone and printed at a drugstore, slightly oversaturated and clear enough. The first photo showed a carburetor. It was original 1974 shovelhead issue sitting on a shelf with a price tag visible at the edge of the frame, $1,850. The second photo showed a voltage regulator, also labeled with a price tag. The third photo showed a shelf of sorted parts with a handwritten inventory list below it, and at the bottom of the list in the handwriting of someone cataloging recently acquired inventory was a line that read 74 VHD assorted Oryx steel. Hope looked at the photographs. "Those are mine," she said. Kane said yes. She looked at him. "Can we get them back?" Kane said, "That is the question." He did not say it like a man who did not know the answer. He said it like a man who wanted to make sure she knew she was the one who got to decide what happened next. "What are my options?" she said. Carver said, "Legally, those parts are stolen property if Steele removed them without authorization and sold them to a third party. You have the title. You have the corrected invoice. You have a statement from yesterday naming the removed components." He looked at Hope. Deputy Perez would be the person to call. Kane said that is one option. Hope looked at him. "What is the other?" Kane said, "The other is that Rollins does not know those parts have a complicated provenance. He bought them in good faith, probably. He may be willing to sell them back if someone makes it worth his while. Not through intimidation. Through a fair offer for parts he would rather not have questions about." "How much?" Hope said. "We would cover it," Kane said. Hope shook her head immediately. "No," she said. "I pay for my own bike." Kane looked at her. He did not argue with it. "Then we go the legal route," he said, "and you let the process work." She thought about Deputy Perez and the careful way she had taken the statement and the way she had said, "Sometimes that tells you something," when Hope asked why she trusted Perez over Greer. She thought about Janet Dalton with her wiper blades and her permit records and her county maintenance shirt. She thought about the invoice on the counter and the engine running and the room full of people paying attention. She thought about what it meant to have the right people on your side without letting them carry what was yours to carry. "Call Perez," she said, "and I will be there when she goes to Rollins. That is my bike. I should be the one who identifies it." Carver looked at Kane. Kane said agreed. He picked up the membership patch from the tool chest and turned it in his hands once, then placed it back in the cloth bag and handed it to Hope. She tied the drawstring. "He said your father would have done the same thing." Hope put the cloth bag in her coat pocket. "Yes," she said. "I think he would have." She called Deputy Perez from the garage parking lot. The afternoon had warmed slightly, the clouds thinning after the morning rain, and the light on Elmore Road was the particular pale gold that October makes when it is trying to be generous. She explained what she had found and what the photograph showed, and what Janet Dalton had told her about Steele's arrangement with the vintage dealer. Perez listened the way she had listened at the station, with the focused silence of someone building a case rather than forming an opinion. "I will need those photographs," Perez said, "and I will need Janet Dalton to make a formal statement about the permit complaints." Hope said, "I can get you both." Perez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have done good work on this, Ms. Cobb." Hope thought about the 3 shifts and the $43 and the way the day before had felt like falling and landing and finding herself still standing. "I just paid attention," she said. Perez moved fast, which surprised Hope in the best possible way. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, she had contacted Janet Dalton, obtained the permit complaint records from the county maintenance database, and issued a formal request to Rollins Vintage Cycle for documentation on recently acquired inventory from Steele's Auto and Salvage. Rollins, it turned out, was not a man who wanted legal trouble. He had a clean business license and a good standing with the County Merchants Association, and the kind of reputation that is built slowly and can be lost quickly. And when a deputy presented him with a title document and a corrected invoice and photographs of his own inventory, he spent 20 minutes on the phone with his attorney and then cooperated fully. Hope was at Carver's garage when Perez called. "He is releasing the parts," Perez said. "He is claiming good faith purchase, which is probably accurate. He bought from Steele without knowing the source was fraudulent." She paused. "Steele, on the other hand, has a bigger problem. The complaint from yesterday, combined with the parts removal and the Rollins transaction, gives us enough for a formal charge. Possibly more if the other cases Janet identified produce documentation." "What happens to Steele?" Hope said. "That is for the DA to work out," Perez said. "What I can tell you is that his business license is under review and the licensing board is reopening the prior complaint." She paused again, and Hope heard in the pause the satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for a piece of paperwork to line up correctly for a long time. "Your statement from yesterday was the anchor," she said. "It was the first one with documentation." "When can I get the parts back?" she said. Perez said, "Day after tomorrow, after the inventory is processed. I will call you." Hope ended the call and sat on the stool in Carver's bay and looked at the motorcycle on the lift, with its original carburetor gone and its voltage regulator replaced. And she thought about the particular audacity of a man who had believed that the people he stole from would never come back. She is going to be fine, Carver said from across the bay. The bike. She needs the work, but there is nothing wrong with her that cannot be put right. I know, Hope said. She looked at the motorcycle the way she had not quite let herself look at it since the morning before, which was as the thing it actually was, her father's motorcycle, sound intact, worth keeping. Worth the 3 shifts and the $43 and the corrected invoice and the statement at the county office and the phone call to Kane and the box on the shelf that she had not opened for 11 months. Worth all of it. Can I come back and watch when you do the work, she said. Carver said, I will call you when the parts come in. She stood and put the cloth bag with the Brotherhood patch in her coat pocket and picked up the shoebox with the photographs and the registration cards and the folded topo map with its penciled circles. She was almost to the door when Carver said he left the club, but the club never left him. I want you to know that. He rode the October road alone every year after he gave back his patch. The same road we ride. We only found out because Kane saw him once riding south in the rain and recognized the bike. Hope stopped at the bay door. Did Kane talk to him? She said. Carver said he pulled up alongside him for about a mile. They did not speak. They just rode. Hope stood at the door for a moment with the October air on her face. Then she said, good. And she walked to the truck and put the shoebox on the passenger seat and drove back to Route 18 and then north toward Harlan. And the sky above the ridge was clearing now, the clouds pulling back from the east, and the last light of the afternoon was long and golden across the bare fields on either side of the road. The parts came back on a Friday afternoon, 2 days after Perez made the call to Rollins. Hope drove to the county evidence processing office on her lunch break from the diner, signed 3 forms, and carried the original 1974 carburetor out to the truck in a cardboard box lined with bubble wrap that the processing officer had added without being asked, which she thought was a small kindness she would remember. The voltage regulator came in a separate bag. The documentation for both listed their recovery from Rollins' vintage cycle and referenced the steel investigation by case number. The headstock bolt, which was too specific a part to have made it into the dealer's inventory before the investigation, had already been replaced by Carver with a period-correct original source through a contact in Tennessee. He had not charged her for the sourcing call. She called Carver from the parking lot of the county office with the box on the seat beside her and told him she had the parts. Come Saturday, he said. We will do it right. Saturday was cold, the first genuinely cold morning of October. The kind of cold that felt like a decision rather than a weather condition. The cold that the ridge makes when it is finished with autumn and is starting to think about winter. Hope drove to Carver's garage with the cardboard box on the passenger seat and her coffee in the cup holder and the cloth bag with the Brotherhood patch in her coat pocket, which was where it had been every day since she found it in the shoebox. Carver was already in the bay when she arrived, the shovelhead on the lift with the work lights. On the bay, smelling of clean metal and coffee from the drip machine. He had laid the tools out on the rolling cart in the order he would need them, which was exactly the kind of preparation her father had always made and which she had always considered a form of respect for the work rather than a preparation for it. She set the box on the tool chest. Carver opened it carefully and lifted the carburetor out with both hands and held it in the light. He turned it slowly, checking the ports, checking the float bowl, running his thumb along the throttle bore. Good condition, he said. Rollins kept it clean. He looked at Hope. Your father would have kept it cleaner. Hope said he would have. They worked through the morning together, Carver installing and Hope watching and asking questions and sometimes holding a component or passing a tool when he needed a third hand. He explained each step without being asked and without being condescending, which told her something about the kind of teacher he was, which she thought was probably the same kind of teacher her father had been, the kind who explains because sharing knowledge is a form of generosity rather than a form of performance. The carburetor went in at 10:15. The voltage regulator followed at 10:40. By 11:30, Carver had checked the valve clearances and replaced the plug wires and finished the brake adjustment, and the motorcycle on the lift had become, in the course of a morning, the machine it had been before Charles Steele put his hands on it. Carver came around the front of the bike and wiped his hands on the red shop rag and looked at Hope. She is done, he said. Hope looked at the motorcycle. She thought about the morning she had stood at Steele's counter with both palms on the plywood, and the engine had started, and the shop had leaned toward her all at once. She thought about her father in the driveway, with a white towel tucked in his belt, telling her that old machines do not forgive impatience. She thought about a man who rode the October road alone every year, because the road was in him even after he had set down the patch. "Can I try her?" Hope said. Carver said, "That is why we fixed her." He brought the bike down from the lift and walked it to the apron in front of the bay, where the gravel was level and clear, and Hope went through the start routine the way she had at Steele's, not hurrying, not performing, just doing the thing her father had taught her in the order he had taught her to do it. Fuel on, choke set, no rushing the throttle. The shovel head started on the second press of the starter, and the sound it made in the cold morning air was different from the sound it had made in Steele's shop, bigger and more itself, because it was running right now with its original parts in their original places, and the sound was the sound her father had called something between a heartbeat and a prayer. She sat on it for 60 seconds with the engine idling and her hands on the grips and the cold air coming into her face and the weight of the machine under her, which was the particular weight of something that has been through something and come back, in which she now understood as a kind of companionship rather than a burden. She shut it down. Carver was watching her from the bay door with his coffee mug in both hands, the red shop rag over one shoulder. He said, "You ride." She said, "My father taught me on this bike. I was 14. He started me in the church parking lot on Sunday mornings when nobody was around." Carver smiled. "He was a careful teacher," he said. "That is how he was." "Yes," Hope said. She sat still for another moment on the cold morning apron in front of Carver's garage on Elmore Road, with the motorcycle's engine ticking quiet and the October light on the gravel and the bare oak branches moving in the wind above the fence line, and she thought about what it meant to hold something long enough to get it back. Her phone buzzed, Kane's number. She answered. "Carver called me," Kane said. "He said she is running." "She is running," Hope said. A pause. Then Kane said, "We are doing the October ride tomorrow. The road your father used to take." He paused. "We would like you to come." Hope looked at the motorcycle. "What time?" she said. 9 in the morning. "Carver's lot." He paused again. 98 riders, give or take. Not for show, just for the road. Hope said, "I will be there." She ended the call and sat on the stool at the entrance to the bay for a moment, looking at the motorcycle on the gravel apron in the October light, and then she said to Carver, "He said 98 riders." Carver finished his coffee. He said, "The ones who knew your father are going to want to see that bike." She drove home by way of the long route up along the Ridge Road, where the view opened out to the south and the whole valley was visible in the cold, clear air, the fields and the tree lines and the roads running through them. She drove slowly, looking at it, and she thought about a man who had ridden this road for 28 years, and then ridden it alone on October mornings for a decade after, and had somehow managed to carry both the things he kept and the things he gave away without letting either one collapse the other. She thought she was beginning to understand how. Sunday morning came in clear and cold. The sky above the ridge, a deep blue that had arrived a month early, the kind of sky that makes distance visible and makes you want to be in it. She had not slept badly the night before, which was notable because she had expected to. Instead, she had slept the way you sleep when something has been resolved that you had not fully understood was unresolved, which is deeply and without the particular vigilance of a person who is still working out how to hold what they have. She had woken at 6:30 with the October dark still outside the apartment window and the coffee brewing before she was fully conscious of deciding to make it, and she had sat at the kitchen table with the shoebox open in front of her and looked at the photographs of her father for 30 minutes before she got dressed, not studying them, just looking at them the way you look at something when you want to carry it with you. Hope was at Carver's lot at 8:40 with the motorcycle in the bed of the borrowed truck, and Carver was already there, coffee in hand, standing beside his own bike, which was a late 70s Ironhead that he rode with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. They came in before 9. She heard them on the Ridge Road first, the deep collective sound of multiple Harleys descending from the east, the sound arriving several seconds before the bikes themselves appeared at the turn onto Elmore Road. And when they came around the bend, she understood for the first time in a concrete way what Kane had meant by the road your father used to take. They came in pairs, mostly a loose column of men on bikes ranging from decade-old to ancient, all of them in denim cuts, and all of them moving at a pace that suggested they had nowhere to be except here, and had decided to take the full measure of the journey. The cuts were varied, some with Brotherhood patches, some with road pins and memorial patches, some with the plain, well-used look of vests that had been worn through all seasons for many years. But the effect was unified. Not uniform. Unified. The difference between a crowd and a company. They filled Carver's lot in the unhurried way of people who know each other's habits, pulling up and cutting engines and nodding and settling into the particular comfortable adjacency of men who have spent years riding the same roads together. Engines ticked and cooled in the cold air. Boots found gravel. Coffee appeared from thermoses passed between hands. Hope stood beside the truck and watched them come and felt something she had not expected, which was that she was not afraid of them. She had been afraid of them 2 days ago at Steele's shop, the automatic fear of the outnumbered and the exhausted, and she understood now that the fear had been misplaced, not because these were frictionless and uncomplicated men, but because safety and safety were two different things, and what surrounded her now was the second kind. Kane found her near the truck. He looked at the motorcycle in the bed and then at her. "Ready to roll her out," he said. "Yes," she said. She unloaded the shovel head with Lawson O'Connor and Wade Decker on either side of the ramp, not because she needed help, but because they offered it in a way that was assistance rather than rescue, which was a distinction she had learned in the past 2 days to recognize. Earl Briggs, the one with the scar on his knuckles, came around and looked at the dent on the left side of the tank and shook his head slowly. "I remember that dent," he said. Hope looked at him. "You knew my father." Earl Briggs said, Chapter 4. "I came in the year after him." He looked at the dent. He said it happened in a driveway. "He laughed about it for years," Hope said. Earl Briggs nodded. "I know," he said. "I heard it many times." He said the last part with the warmth of someone describing a memory they are glad to have. And Hope thought about the way her father's laughter had lived in other people's ears for 30 years without her ever knowing it. And she felt the weight of the shoebox on the passenger seat and the cloth bag in her coat pocket and the fact that the oak was for her. The Brotherhood gathered around the motorcycle the way people gather around something they recognize from a long time ago, not crowding it, just present with it. And Hope stood among them and listened to their voices in the conversations that began to move between them. Brief exchanges of memory that attached themselves to the machine and to the man who had owned it. He used to say that bike could read the road. "He fixed my exhaust pipe one winter without being asked. Drove 40 miles to do it. Best sense of direction I ever saw in a man. Never used a map." She listened to each one. She did not try to add to them or correct them or explain them. She just listened, and each one added something to the picture she was building of a man she had thought she knew completely and was discovering she had only known from one angle, which is the angle every child has of a parent, and which is always both true and incomplete. One man, heavy-set with a gray-flecked beard and an old road scar across his chin, looked at the bike and then at Hope and said, "Your daddy got me home one night in '89 when my transmission went out on a back road in the dark. Sat with me for 4 hours waiting for the tow. Never mentioned it again." Another man, thin and quiet, with the patient eyes of someone who has spent his life listening more than he speaks, said only he was the best kind of man, which meant something specific in the way the man said it, a precision of praise that carried more weight than elaboration would have. She looked at these men and thought about the 11 months of alone and what it had cost her in small daily ways. She had not let herself fully account for the mornings she had made coffee for one, and the evenings she had sat at the kitchen table with no one to tell about the day. And she thought that what surrounded her now was not a substitute for that, but it was also not nothing, which was a different kind of accounting. At 9:15, Kane stood near the front of the gathered bikes and raised his hand once. The conversation settled. He said, "We ride this road every October because it is the road we have always ridden, and because the people who rode it before us deserve to be remembered on it." He looked at Hope. "William Cobb rode with us for 3 years, and then he made a different choice. And the road was part of that choice too, because he kept coming back to it." He looked at the shovelhead. "Today we bring his bike back to the road." He looked at Hope. "And we bring him with us." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Hope sat on the motorcycle. She put her right hand flat on the dent on the left side of the tank, in the spot where her father's elbow had caught the fence post on a summer afternoon when she was 6 years old, and the sound of it had made him go still for 1 second before he started laughing, and she held it there for just a moment. Then she went through the routine. Fuel on, choke set, no rushing the throttle. The shovel head started, and the sound it made in the cold Sunday morning air over Carver's gravel lot was the sound her father had described, and she understood it now in a way she had not the first time she heard him say it, which is that some sounds do not describe themselves in words and have to be heard in the right context before they become what they are. It was somewhere between a heartbeat and a prayer. She rode. She led the column out of Carver's lot, and onto Elmore Road, and then north to the junction with the Ridge Road, and behind her she heard the Brotherhood come out of the lot in pairs. Engine after engine, the sound of them building and combining into the particular collective sound of many bikes on a cold, clear road, which is not a loud sound so much as a deep one, a sound you feel in the chest rather than hear with the ears. The Ridge Road ran along the east face of the mountain, and the view to the south opened out below them as they climbed the whole valley, coming visible in the cold morning light, the fields and the creek beds and the roads running through the bottomland. And she rode through it at a pace she had chosen herself, which was the pace of someone who is not going anywhere specific but intends to arrive. Lawson O'Connor came up on her left at the first straightaway and matched her pace without crowding her. Wade Decker fell in on her right a quarter mile later. Kane was somewhere behind them in the column not leading today, leaving the front of the road to the bike he had helped bring back to it. She rode the Ridge Road for 11 miles and then the October Road that descended through the hollow on the backside and came out on the flat county road that ran west through the bottomland before curving north again toward Harlan. She rode it at a pace her father would have recognized, not slow and not hurrying, the pace of a man who had learned that the road does not reward speed so much as it rewards presence. At the long curve above the creek where the road bends and the valley comes fully into view to the north, and the line of bare oaks along the ridge above turned silver in the October light, she thought about her father riding this same curve alone on an October morning 10 years ago, and Kane coming up alongside him, and the two of them riding in silence for a mile without needing to speak, because some things do not require speaking to be understood. She understood that now. She rode the mile above the creek in the company of 98 motorcycles, in the memory of a man who had kept a patch in a cloth bag on a shelf because it meant something that did not need to be explained to anyone. And she felt in the movement of the road and the weight of the machine and the cold air coming into her face the thing he had been trying to tell her from the doorway of the kitchen every time he came home, still dripping, still grinning. The old girl never let me down. She rode the October Road until it curved back north, and the Harlan Water Tower came into view over the tree line ahead, and then she brought the column off the road at the turnout above the creek, where they had planned to stop the wide gravel pull-off with the view to the south that her father had shown her once on a Saturday when she was 11 years old and told her this was the best view in the county, and you had to go over something first to earn it. She cut the engine. The Brotherhood came off the road behind her in their pairs and cut their engines one by one until the sound of the column became silence, and the silence became the particular fullness of a cold October morning above a creek, which is a sound that is not a sound exactly, but that has a quality to it, a quality of being heard. Kane came up beside her. He looked at the view and then at her. "How did she ride?" he said. "She rides like herself," Hope said. "Like she always did." Kane nodded. He reached into his vest pocket and took out a small enameled pin, the Brotherhood's Oak and Road emblem in dark metal no larger than a thumbnail. He held it out to her. "Not a patch," he said. "Not a claim. Just something to carry if you want it." Hope looked at the pin in his palm. She thought about the cloth bag in her coat pocket and the oak emblem on the patch and what her father had said when Carver stitched it about the oak being for her. She took the pin. She held it for a moment in her closed hand, feeling the small weight of it, and then she opened her hand and looked at it in the October light. It was a good weight to carry. She turned and looked at the 98 men on their bikes behind her, arranged along the pull-off in the cold morning light, with the valley below them and the ridge above them, and the road running through both, and she thought about her father in the middle of all of this, present in every way that mattered, which was in the machine and in the road, and in the faces of the men who remembered him, and in the cloth bag in her coat pocket, and in the dent on the left side of the tank that he had laughed about for years. She put the pin in her coat pocket with the cloth bag. She looked out at the valley. The view from the October Road was everything her father had said it was, and he had been right that you had to go over something first to earn it, and she had gone over something, and here she was. Kane said from beside her, "October Road again next year." She thought about it for 1 second. "Yes," she said. He nodded once and stepped back, and she sat on the gravel step at the edge of the pull-off and looked out at the valley below the creek, running bright in the morning light, and the county roads winding through the bottomland in their patient patterns. And somewhere on one of those roads, Carver's garage sat with its bay doors up and its lift empty, and the smell of clean oil and metal shavings in the air, waiting for the next thing that needed fixing. She thought about what came next because There was always something that came next, and she had stopped pretending otherwise, which was something she had learned not gradually but all at once on the morning 11 months ago, when a phone rang and the world reorganized itself into before and after, and she understood for the first time that she had been living as if the important things could be postponed indefinitely. They could not be postponed. The motorcycle in the truck bed could not be postponed. The shoebox on the shelf could not be postponed. The $43 in the corrected invoice and the engine that ran when the room said it would not, none of it could have been postponed, and she was glad sitting on the cold gravel above the creek with 98 engines quiet around her and the October valley spread below. She was genuinely glad that she had driven back to Steele's instead of going home. She thought about what came next. What came next was tires, which Carver knew a place for, and a rear brake cable that was already adjusted but would need checking again in spring, and the valve check that would want doing after 500 miles, and the plug wires that were new but would need monitoring. The ongoing particular care that an old machine requires, which is not the care of something fragile, but the care of something irreplaceable, which is a different kind of care, more patient and more specific. What came next was also 3 shifts probably, and the $43 stretched until payday and the water stain above the baseboard heater at the apartment that the landlord had not yet addressed. The accumulated small, ongoing administrative labor of a life that had not stopped requiring attention during the past few days. And what came next October, was the Ridge Road. She was 26 years old and she had 3 shifts next week and a water stain on the wall and $43 that had become $220, that had become parts from a dealer in the next county that were now installed in a running machine in her father's name. And the math of all of it, the real math, the math that did not show up on any invoice was this: she had not signed the form. She had not signed the form and the engine had run and the road had been there the whole time waiting. She looked out at the valley one more time. The October light was long and pale across the bottomland, and the creek caught it in bright flashes between the bare banks, and the bare oaks stood against the ridge in their patient way, holding nothing back and losing nothing. She knew where to find the road now. Below her, the 98 engines waited quiet in the cold morning, and when she stood and turned back to the motorcycle, Lawson O'Connor looked up from where he was leaning against his handlebars and nodded once, and Wade Decker lifted 2 fingers from his grip in the small salute that bikers give each other on the road, and Earl Briggs just watched the shovelhead the way he had been watching it since she rolled it out of the truck, with the expression of someone looking at something that is in exactly the right place. She sat on the motorcycle. Kane walked to his own bike without ceremony, and Lawson O'Connor and Wade Decker and Earl Briggs moved to theirs, and all the other men in the lot moved to theirs, and the lot became the particular organized motion of people who have done this many times and know how to do it together. And there was something in that motion, in the practiced ease of 98 men getting ready to ride, that felt to Hope like the most ordinary, extraordinary thing she had ever seen. She went through the routine one more time, because the routine was the thing her father had given her when she was 14 years old in a church parking lot on a Sunday morning, and she did not intend to rush it just because the road was waiting. Fuel on, choke set, no rushing the throttle. The shovelhead started, and the sound moved out across the pull-off and down the ridge, and across the October valley below, and the Brotherhood heard it and started their own engines one by one, the sound of them building behind her into the collective sound of the road, and she led them back onto the Ridge Road and north toward Harlan, with the cold air on her face and the weight of the machine under her hands, and the cloth bag and the small pin in her coat pocket. Her father had said the old girl never let him down. She believed him now in the way you believe things when you have tested them yourself, which is the only kind of believing that matters. She rode,